Immigration issue is evidence that the Democrat Party does seek to fundamentally transform America. I don't care how much I'm attacked on this issue. I've led on this issue for over a decade when some of the other hosts were playing footsie with Marco Rubio and thinking about comprehensive immigration reform. I said, no, no, hell no. Which is why I wrote about it 10 years ago at some length. But my point is this, ladies and gentlemen. It is clear that the Democrats and the media are attempting to fundamentally transform this country through immigration, among other means. It is clear that there are countries around the world, and particularly south of the border, who seek to do exactly that. It is clear that we cannot possibly assimilate 1 million people or more, 1.5 million to 1.7 million this coming year, coming into this country, barely literate in their own language, poor, unskilled, pouring into our cities, our neighborhoods. It is impossible for a country to be a civil society, to have a civil society with this kind of invasion. Whether the media like to talk about it or not, whether the media attempt to call us names or not, the fact of the matter is, a country exists for its citizens. Citizens don't exist to accommodate politicians, to accommodate the media, to accommodate foreign governments and aliens who seek to come into this country illegally. The history of immigration in this country is a very tolerant history. That's why people say we're a nation of immigrants. You can't have a nation of immigrants. You're a nation of citizens that tolerates or promotes immigration, depending on the situation. We don't need 1.5, 1.7 illegal aliens coming into this country. There aren't jobs for them. There aren't taxes being paid to support our massive welfare state that the left has created. The issue is, what does America need? What does the American citizenry want? Not what families who come here illegally demand, not what other governments want. This is our country. Red, white, blue, whatever color people are, whatever their religion. This is the country, the American people. This government is set up to represent the American people. We don't represent the whole world in this country. These are American institutions. That's an American Constitution. It's an American culture. We have people in this country who have found a home in the Democrat Party, and they run the Democrat Party. We have people in this country who pretend to be newsmen and newswomen who are propagandists. Immigration is out of control, and it's been out of control for half a century. We can't even manage our borders. Law enforcement, federal law enforcement's overwhelmed. We don't have facilities for all these people. We don't have administrative law judges enough to handle these cases. We have these outrageous immigration laws that people are playing. They know how to play them. Why? Because we have lawyers who go south of the border and advise them on how to play our rules. Claim refugee status. Then you don't have to leave. Seek asylum. Then you don't have to leave. Then you have to show up in court in a year or two. And over 90% of them never show up. This is an effort to fundamentally transform America. I heard Obama when he was president, Biden when he was vice president. They were very excited about the cultural shift, about the change in color of the population. That's not what you have immigration for. Immigration is supposed to be colorblind. When people come into this country, they need to have skills. They need to have a form of sustenance, jobs, money. People pouring over the border who can't care for themselves. Moreover, we don't know who they are. We don't know their records. They come here illegally. We, the American people, in 2 weeks' time, we're paying our federal income taxes. pay our federal income taxes or we go to federal prison. We follow the rules. We pay our way. We ask nothing from anybody. That's the way I was raised. And the minute people cross the border, their hand is out for a program, for civil rights, for whatever the issue is. We have never, ever seen anything like this. The breakdown of law and order, supported by a major political party and the American news media. We have never seen anything like this in our country. This is flat-out tyranny, whether it's immigration, whether it's health care, whether it's the attack on the Electoral College, whether it's the attack on the last election, trying to take out the President of the United States. You are witnesses to tyranny. That's what's taking place in this country. And I'm not kidding. The breakdown of the civil society, the breakdown of the rule of law. And people come into this country. They come into this country, many of them, not all of them, but many of them with the wrong attitude because they listen to the Democrats, they listen to the left, they listen to our media, they listen to the immigration lawyers. They think they have a right to be here once they're here. A right to be here once they're here. We have federal judges appointed by Obama, among others, who confer rights on illegal aliens. We have federal judges who overturn this president's efforts to stop the invasion, to enforce the rule of law. We have mayors and city councils. We have governors who unilaterally announce they're not going to follow federal law. They're not going to assist ICE to remove people who've committed crimes and come out of jails. These are called federal detainers, as you know. They embrace nullification. Nullification, as I've told you for years, was the watchword of the Confederacy. We have a Supreme Court that is utterly inconsistent on this issue of immigration. A few years back, when the state of Arizona tried to protect itself from illegal immigration, it embraced federal immigration enforcement laws. But Obama did not. Obama defied the spirit and reality of these laws. The legislature and governor of Arizona said, well, we're going to follow federal law. So they're taken all the way to the Supreme Court, and by a 5-4 decision, a decision written by Anthony Kennedy, the Supreme Court ruled effectively that the President of the United States has plenary power, meaning virtually all power when it comes to immigration. Here you had a state trying to enforce federal law. Now the courts have ruled opposite, that Donald Trump says, okay, now I'm the president, and I'm going to enforce immigration laws. And you cities and towns and you states that are nullifying federal law and the supremacy clause of the Constitution, we're going to cut funds off, law enforcement funds. Oh, you can't do that. Why? You're not allowed to do that. What are you, a dictator? You can't just issue an executive order. You can't just direct your Department of Justice to do it. You must be a dictator. Now, enough is enough. Enough is enough. The entire country is affected by this. We're the playthings of the Democrat Party. We've got states that were red turning purple, purple states turning blue. We have voter laws that have built within them their own demise to ensure that after the votes are counted on Election Day, more votes are counted after Election Day. And God forbid you insist on seeing a birth certificate. God forbid you must be a racist. You must be suppressing the vote. Because you only want a white nation, you see. We've heard it and heard it and heard it. A few months ago, Jim Acosta confronted the President of the United States at that infamous press conference, interrupted him, disrupted the press conference, because he's a social activist. He's a leftist. And he admonished the President of the United States from his CNN chair for calling this an invasion. You know it's not an invasion, Mr. President. Oh, that's my term. I believe it is, the President said. Acosta hadn't been to the border at the time. Acosta hadn't been in any of these so-called caravans at any time, at that time. He didn't know a damn thing. He was sitting in his office at CNN or strolling around the White House grounds grumbling about how he's mistreated. But the president was right, and he's right now. And Acosta was wrong because Acosta's a fraud. This isn't just an invasion. It's an invasion over and over and over and over again. And our government responds time and again with amnesty, 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 amnesty. People used to ask me, Mark, if we had a situation like we had at the beginning of World War II, do you think we could win? Do you think the country could get together and win? There are very, very courageous, brave men and women in this country who have volunteered for the military. They represent a small fraction of our population. But do I think the population overall would rally? I don't know. If we won't even protect our sovereignty by securing the border without going to war, I just don't know. I think there are people in our midst who've been so brainwashed by universities, by television, so-called news, or countries they've come from. They abuse our country. They use our country. They badmouth our country while they luxuriate in our country. Like no other country on the damn face of the earth. I don't know. And if I hear one more time from that old red, Bernie Sanders, who used to point to Moscow as the great place, who used to point to Havana as the great place, and Venezuela, if I hear one more damn time about what they do in Scandinavia, who gives a damn what they do in Scandinavia? Freedom does not depend on the Scandinavian countries. Freedom depends on a free United States of America. I'll be right back. You know, when I wrote Liberty and Tyranny many years ago, I dug into the history of a number of subjects, including immigration. And this book serves as a guide to a lot of hosts on TV and radio. And so what I want to do is walk you through a little bit of history so you know how we got to this insidious place. A place where lawlessness is treated as something to pursue, where foreigners who haven't even stepped foot in this country are considered more noble than American citizens. Why? Because they're more reliably Democrat. That's why. That's the bottom line. The country exists for the Democrat Party. The government is an appendage of the Democrat Party and vice versa. Donald Trump, like any other Republican, particularly Trump, like Reagan, is considered alien to what they've created, this massive Leviathan. And they want to create another one, make it even bigger, with the Green New Deal and so forth and so on. This is all intended to exclude you from your own country, to exclude you as a participant. And you're mocked and you're laughed at. Tell me, anybody on TV ever call illegal aliens deplorables? Anybody on TV ever call illegal aliens neo-Nazis? Anybody on TV ever call illegal aliens toothless? Like they do. All those names been used against Trump supporters and other conservatives. All those names. They wouldn't dare say that about illegal aliens. And they shouldn't say it about illegal aliens. But they wouldn't dare. Absolute disrespect for citizenship, the rule of law, the Constitution. It's tyranny. It's not the Democrat Party, it's the tyranny party. It's the tyranny party. They want to get rid of the Electoral College. I'll get into that later. What does that mean? And they want to get rid of the Senate now. Meanwhile, you have people in the Senate running for president. They don't resign as a demonstration on how it works. What do they want? They want a European Parliament. That's what they want. But I want to give you a little history lesson on how we got here on immigration. Not somebody using my book. Me. I'll use my own words. We'll be right back. Little history lesson. Straight out of Liberty and Tyranny. How'd we get to this place? In 1965, as part of the Great Society, the statists laid the foundation for radically altering the character of American society and the relationship of the governed to their government. When he signed the so-called Hart-Celler Act, named after a senator and a congressman, President Lyndon Johnson said, quote, "This bill that we will sign today is not a revolutionary bill. It does not affect the lives of millions. It will not reshape the structure of our daily lives or really add, importantly, to either our wealth or our power." And during the debate over the bill on the floor of the Senate, Senator Ted Kennedy claimed, quote, "First, our cities will not be flooded with 1 million immigrants annually. Under the proposed bill, the present level of immigration remains substantially the same. Secondly, the ethnic mix of this country will not be upset. Contrary to the charges in some quarters, the bill will not inundate America with immigrants from one country or one area, or the most populated and economically deprived nations of Africa and Asia." Johnson, Kennedy, and other statists were wrong, and it is hard to believe they were not intentionally deceiving the public. In 1964, Republican vice presidential candidate Representative William Miller of New York well understood the overall increase in immigration that would result from this 1965 act. Here's what he said. "We estimate that if the president gets his way and the current immigration laws are repealed, the number of immigrants next year will increase threefold, and in subsequent years will increase even more." Now, the bill abolished decades-old policy of national quotas, which was said to be discriminatory because it favored immigrants from Europe, especially the UK, Ireland, and Germany, over the Third World. The bill also introduced for the first time a system of chain migration. That's right, it started in 1965, which, as the Center for Immigration Studies notes, gave higher preference to the relatives of American citizens and permanent resident aliens than to applicants with special job skills. So the historical basis for making immigration decisions was radically altered in 1965. The emphasis would no longer be on the preservation of American society and the consent of the governed. Now aliens themselves would decide who comes to the United States through family reunification. And with the elimination of national quotas and the imposition of chain migration, aliens immigrating to the United States were poorer, less educated, and less skilled than those who had preceded them, a pattern that continues to this day. To this day. The late author, a liberal too, Theodore White, no conservative, wrote that the Immigration Act of 1965 changed all previous patterns, and in doing so, probably changed the future of America. It was noble, revolutionary, and probably the most thoughtless of the many acts of the Great Society. Now listen to this. In the 1960s, Cesar Chavez, one of the founders of the United Farm Workers, UFW union, vehemently opposed illegal immigration, arguing it undermined his efforts to unionize farm workers and improve working conditions and wages for American citizen workers. The UFW even reported illegal immigrants to the Immigration and Naturalization Service at the time. In 1969, Cesar Chavez led a march accompanied by Ralph Abernathy, president of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, who'd been Martin Luther King's right-hand man. Senator Walter Mondale, who was vice president later under Jimmy Carter, along the border with Mexico, protesting the farmers' use of illegal immigration. Think about that. Think about that. Back then, wasn't that long ago. And I wrote this book, Liberty and Tyranny, 10 or 11 years ago. And the statistics haven't changed on the consequences to this country, particularly with respect to illegal immigration. Rather than Americanize aliens and use public and private institutions to inculcate them with the virtues of American culture, language, mores, history, traditions, and customs, the statist, the left, is cultivating a cultural relativism in which the cultures from which the aliens fled are given equal accord with the American culture. But all cultures are not equal, as evidenced in part by the alien fleeing his own country for the American culture, and the American citizen staying put. And the American citizen staying put. 1796, George Washington's farewell address, he said in part, "Citizens, either by birth or choice, of a common country, that country has the right to concentrate your affections. The name of American, which belongs to you in your national capacity, must always exalt the just pride of patriotism more than any appellation derived from local discriminations." For more than 2 centuries, individuals with diverse backgrounds have come together to form a national melting pot and a harmonious society, sustained by allegiance to the country and its founding principles. But today's open-ended mass migration, coupled with the destructive influences of biculturalism, multiculturalism, bilingualism, multilingualism, dual citizenship, and affirmative action, have combined to form the building blocks of a different kind of society, where aliens are taught to hold tightly to their former cultures and languages. Balkanization grows, antagonism and conflict are aroused, and victimhood is claimed at all perceived slights. If a nation does not show and teach respect for its own identity, principles, and institutions, that corrosive attitude is conveyed to the rest of the world, including newly arriving aliens. And if this is unchecked, the nation will ultimately cease to exist. The late Dr. Samuel Huntington, who served as chairman of Harvard's government department and its Academy for International and Area Studies, observed this, quote, "The persistent inflow of Hispanic immigrants threatens to divide the United States into 2 peoples, 2 cultures, 2 languages. The United States ignores this challenge at its own peril." So what did he say? The problem, he said, is not Latinos, not Caucasian Americans. It's a lack of assimilation. A lack of assimilation. He said demographically, socially, and culturally, the reconquest of the southwestern United States by immigrants from the South is well underway. Now, the United States, in many respects, is already a bilingual nation. Government at all levels and a growing list of private concerns do business in both English and Spanish. And Spanish is the predominant language in communities throughout the country. This is a destructive condition. St. Augustine, may I quote St. Augustine? St. Augustine observed, "When men cannot communicate their thoughts to each other, simply because of difference of language, all the similarity of their common human nature is of no avail to unite them in fellowship." Alexis de Tocqueville made the same point. He wrote, "Language is perhaps the strongest, perhaps most enduring link which unites men." How can the alien participate fully in American society if he does not share the language that binds citizen to citizen? How can he acquire better skills, pursue higher ed learning, or interact effectively in the marketplace if he does not speak English? How can he assess the benefit of entering into contracts or other legal arrangements if he cannot understand the terms and conditions to which he commits himself? And most important, how can the alien comprehend the nation's founding principles and pledge allegiance to them if he cannot be sure of their intended meaning. Yet proponents of unrestricted immigration vilify those who attempt to promote a common language. Whether it's the National Council for La Raza, meaning the race in English, which works tirelessly against the assimilation of legal Hispanic aliens into American society, and works tirelessly for illegal migration. This is the truth. This is the truth. The U.S. Chamber of Commerce and other business interests in the United States are economic enablers for this mentality. It's hard to believe that the Chamber uses its considerable clout with Congress to urge the importation of even more low-skilled and unskilled laborers. After all, who else will cut lawns, right? Wash dishes and pick lettuce. Of course, Americans will, if the price is right. Our friend, the Hoover Institution's Thomas Sowell writes, virtually any job is a job that Americans will not take if the pay is low enough. Nor is there any reason for pay to rise if illegal immigrants are available at low pay. And Mark Krikorian of the Center for Immigration Studies, he wrote some time ago, if the supply of foreign workers were to dry up, employers would respond to this new, tighter labor market in two ways. One, they would offer higher wages, increased benefits, and improved working conditions so as to recruit and retain people from the remaining pool of workers. And at the same time, the same employers will look for ways to eliminate some of the jobs they now have and are having trouble filling. The result would be a new equilibrium with blue-collar workers making somewhat better money, but each one of those workers being more productive. The late Minnesota Senator and Democratic presidential candidate Eugene McCarthy, who was really a fascinating man. He was very much a libertarian and yet voted repeatedly for big centralized government programs. He also endorsed Ronald Reagan for president in 1980. Here's what he wrote. The United States cannot regain its competitive standing in the world by importing low-wage workers from other countries. On the one hand, it engenders conditions this country cannot and should not tolerate. On the other hand, in the modern age, a nation's wealth and prosperity is secured by high worker productivity and capital investment, not by the availability of low-wage labor. This is how Democrats used to think, ladies and gentlemen. Whether it was Mondale or Eugene McCarthy, Ralph Abernathy, Cesar Chavez. This is how Democrats used to think. But not anymore. The costs are obvious in so many respects, and what we're supposed to do is believe otherwise. For the conservative to say that America is a nation of immigrants and no more is to conflate society with immigration and treat them as equivalents. They are not. Immigration can contribute to the well-being of society, but can also contribute to its demise. The social contract is a compact between and among Americans, not Americans and the world's citizens. The American government governs by the consent of its citizens, not the consent of aliens and their governments. And American citizens are not interchangeable with all other citizens. American culture is not interchangeable with all other cultures. And the American government is not interchangeable with all other governments. The purpose of immigration policies must be to preserve and improve the American society. The American society. The status has been accustomed to setting immigration policy without notice from the American people. But the people are now witnesses to the events and costs associated with the current state of immigration in their own communities. They have made clear they want some order brought to the chaos. The evidence and prudence guide the conservatives' priorities, which include securing the borders to prevent not only illegal aliens from crossing in the U.S., but criminals and terrorists as well, enforcing current immigration laws, including finding and prosecuting businesses that hire illegal aliens, deporting newly apprehended illegal aliens, and deporting aliens who overstay their visas, denying sanctuary cities federal funds for contributing to lawless behavior, English and assimilation promoted in all the nation's institutions, not bilingualism and multiculturalism. Limits on the number of aliens admitted into the country to allow for workable assimilation. The denial of most social services to illegal aliens to deter their migration to the United States. Repelling Mexico's interference in the internal affairs of our nation, and the elimination of chain migration and birthright citizenship, which put the aliens' desires before society's well-being. As is his practice, the status engages in tactics intended to proscribe debate. Those who dissent from his immigration policies, often characterized as exclusionists, nativists, xenophobes, and even racists. The neo-status, that is the neocon, offers no alternative to the status quo and condemns the conservative for not going along. He not only accommodates balkanization, but panders to it. But the good citizen contributes to the social cohesion of the civil society for his own benefit and the benefit of society. He expects his government to do the same. And the conservative believes that to the extent immigration can be applied to that purpose, it is desirable. When it is not, it is destructive.
Mark Levin.
So the Democrats want to flood our country, eventually give amnesty, want to eliminate the Electoral College. They want to pander and buy votes through balkanization and the welfare state. And they're on their way. It's no coincidence that they're demanding that the border remain open. They pretend they aren't, but they're demanding it. And at the same time try to eliminate the Republican aspects of our government, small r Republican, for a pure democracy. And the big trick here has always been to convince people to vote for socialism or Marxism or some form of autocracy where they actually think they have more control over their lives when in fact they have no control over their lives. And may I strongly encourage you, my fellow Levinites, to surge, to act now, to go on to Amazon.com or any of the other online purchasing services and acquire your copy of Unfreedom of the Press. I predict this book will be every bit as big as Liberty and Tyranny, and it'll be every bit as important. Every bit as important, because the media in this country are of the hard left and they are driving the agenda. And I examined it every which way and in ways that people haven't even considered. So I hope you'll act quickly to get your pre-order copy. It's 40% off at Amazon.com. We'll be right back. The Democrats would love nothing more than to see us splinter into 1,000 different groups at each other's throats, because that's their politics. They don't believe in uniting this country. They believe in centralizing the government. I don't know why we play footsie with a potential police state, ladies and gentlemen. I don't know why we're prepared to surrender the greatest nation on the face of the earth. We're not great because of Washington, D.C. We're not great because of politicians. We're not great because of illegal immigrants. We're great because we're Americans. We are a great people. We've done great things. We look out for our fellow man when we can, whether in this country or other countries. We're largely a people of faith, not in government, in God. God's name is in our founding document, all throughout our founding document. When you read my new book, Unfreedom of the Press, you're going to learn things that I learned as well. Freedom of the press, in many respects, was given birth in this country. A huge country with disparate colonies. Because the relative handful of individuals who had access to printing presses, and there were very few early on, were challenging the orthodoxy of certain religions, or, heads of religion. At the same time that we were developing freedom of the press, we were advancing freedom of speech. This country is soaked, and I mean it in a positive way, in faith, in the Judeo-Christian faith. Soaked in it. It existed in this country before we had a government. That is, a federal government. It existed in this country before we had elected governors or legislatures, mostly British-appointed governors and so forth. It's through faith, it's through religion. And challenging various acts of fundamentalism, but embracing Reformation, that we got a free press in the first place. Now, how many people knew that? Did you know that, Mr. Producer? It's an incredible thing. People know nothing about this, and that's our history. History didn't start with the New Deal. History didn't start with the Great Society. History didn't start with Barack Obama. We have a great history. We have a grand history. And it's important that successive generations of immigrants embrace it and are assimilated into it. Not that they try and impose their culture from which they escaped, from which they fled into our country. When President Trump called some of these countries S-hole countries, he was attacked as a racist. But he was right. Some of them are. That's why people will travel 1,000 miles to get to our border. If they weren't, why would they do that? They're escaping their countries. They're escaping their cultures. And yet when they come here, they're encouraged to continue to celebrate their cultures. I'm not talking about on a special day of the year, you know, a Columbus Day or what have you, or St. Patrick's Day, or no. I'm talking about in lieu of the American culture. Of course you want to embrace your ancestry and so on. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about supplanting the American culture. Read your Declaration of Independence. When's the last time the left talked about the Declaration of Independence and its reference to natural rights? Natural rights. They don't. Whenever they talk about the Constitution, it is to enshrine their ideology or to attack it. You know, I've said over the years that we live in so many ways in a post-constitutional country. We do. We do. That's by design. That's by the design of the progressives. You know, I'm sure I'll be dead and gone for a long time before people really realize this, other than you, my beloved audience. But if you read each one of my books, seriatim, one after another after another, I'm not telling you to do it. I'm just saying if you do, you'll see the logic to everything that I've been writing over the last 10, 12, 15 years, whatever it's been. Well, it's been since 2005, I guess. In this book, on freedom of the press included. There's a logic to it. I already know down the future what I'm going to do. But it's very, very important to understand the book that I've written now. It's going to be out in a few weeks. Very important to understand it. Because when you look at the history of the press and you look at the history of this country, what they meant by a free press was a press to advance the cause of liberty. Liberty. To advance the cause of the principles you see and read in the Declaration of Independence. Another fascinating fact you may not know. It was the press prior to the Revolutionary period and during the Revolutionary period that did more to shape the principles of this country
than any other institution. Those original printers, those original newspaper men, there were less than 40 newspapers when the Revolutionary War broke out. Those pamphleteers, of which there were many, like Thomas Paine, were absolutely crucial. Crucial, starting the revolution and taking us through the revolution. Absolutely, completely opposite and unlike our media today. The social activist media, the Democratic Party media. Completely different than the press, the new press of the American era. They were committed to these principles. You know, it's interesting. They didn't even believe in printing. I'm going too far. I'm going to get slapped, but I don't care. They didn't even believe in being objective necessarily. It's true. They believed in advancing Americanism. And they didn't hide it. And they didn't hide it. There were obviously some few newspapers and some pamphleteers who took a different position. And they were denounced by the other papers and pamphleteers. But these men were always under threat by the Crown. They had to pick up their printing presses and their typeset and from time to time move from one place to another. You may have heard of one of them, Benjamin Franklin. His older brother was one of the earliest printers in Boston, which is where Franklin was born, moved to Philadelphia. These were true patriots, ladies and gentlemen. What I'm trying to convey, and perhaps not as well as I do in the book, you can see the synergy back then between the nascent early press, pre-revolution, revolution, and then constitutional period. They would fight over issues, there's no question. The media would take position, there's no question. But they were all headed in the general same direction. I've said here before, I was born in the wrong time in the wrong in history. I really believe it. That would have been my time. Today we don't advance the cause of liberty. Today we do not advance the causes that were espoused by the revolutionary press, by the colonists, by the founders. We're on defense. Where are we advancing liberty? Where are we advancing individualism? Nowhere. As a society, absolutely nowhere. We're trying to fend off tyranny and the tyrants who espouse it, who dress it up as some kind of a communal interest. So as I say, when you go through all my books, and especially this one, it all comes together. But this one's very, very important given our time. And I decided to write it given our time, actually some time ago. But I decided to write it in earnest and push it out as quickly as I could, given the abuse of the media, not just to our president, which is bad enough, but to you, the American people. To actually have so-called journalists, anchormen, hosts, and their bosses trash millions, tens of millions of Americans. This is new. This is unique. The free press has been hijacked by ideologues. Some of them quite dim-witted, but nonetheless, ideologues, many of them knee-jerk ideologues. It's been hijacked by a social activism movement. That's why so many of you who revere our history, revere our Declaration, revere our Constitution, revere capitalism, your jaw hits the floor every time you turn on the television.